Hey guys, tonight we're landing somewhere we probably shouldn't. Not because the air is toxic, or the ground unstable, or the local fauna hungry, but because nothing ever ends there. Not pain, not memory, not even the people. This isn't a war zone or a cursed planet. It's just still alive. All of it. All the time. So before we drift too deep, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy these slow, strange stories about places we were never meant to visit. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what phase the moon is in above your part of the world. I always love seeing just how far these stories stretch. Now, dim the lights, maybe crack open a window, or turn on a fan, if only to remind yourself that air is still moving. Let the quiet hum of the room settle around you like a blanket, because tonight we're heading far beyond the mapped stars, to a world where no cell ever dies, where wounds forget to close, where even the trees remember too much, and where the real danger isn't what might kill you, it's what won't. They called it Halcyon 3. Not because it was the third planet in its system, and not because it had ever known peace, but because it looked peaceful from orbit. A soft green-blue orb, shrouded in mist, and quietly rotating under a stable yellow sun. It even had a ring. Delicate, translucent, faintly shimmering, like someone had dusted the sky with ground pearl. The scans came back clean, breathable atmosphere, moderate temperatures, no known predators, no electromagnetic interference, no recorded seismic activity, no signs of sentience, no signs of anything dying. The last part was never highlighted in the briefing, just listed under biological anomalies, an outlier, a curiosity, something to flag for follow-up. The crew of the Lysandra didn't follow up. They were tired. It had been 13 cycles since the last true landfall, 13 cycles of frozen food, recycled air, and dreamless sleep. Halcyon 3 promised something close to comfort. Soil that accepted weight, trees that moved without wind, water that tasted slightly of mint. The landing was smooth, textbook. No resistance, no turbulence. The surface welcomed them like a waiting host. And that should have been the first warning. The planet didn't reject them. It didn't question their presence. It simply made space. The grass parted gently beneath the landing struts. The pressure readings stabilized instantly. No foreign spores in the cabin. No microflora adjusting to human presence. It was as if the world had already accounted for them. And when they stepped outside, they felt the silence, not emptiness, not vacancy. A held silence, like a breath taken and never exhaled. The trees were tall and thin, their bark a silvery green that shimmered when seen from the corner of the eye. No birds, no insects, just occasional rustling, like something unseen adjusting itself. Commander Doran was the first to speak. Feels like we walked into a dream. No one disagreed. The light didn't shift. The clouds didn't move. It was daytime, perpetually. Not because the planet didn't rotate, but because it didn't seem to care about shadows. They hiked toward the nearest ridge. The ground was too soft, not muddy, just accommodating, as though every footstep was considered and accepted. Even the rock seemed rounded, eroded not by time, but by intention. They left no trail. Every crushed leaf reformed the moment they passed. Every footprint faded within seconds. No decay, said Aras, the ship's biologist, crouching beside a fallen branch. No microbial breakdown. This should be brittle. Instead, it's soft, still moist. No signs of rot. Maybe it only just fell, said Mila, the communications officer. Maybe. But there were too many such branches, too many leaves on the ground, all pristine, all recent. Doran ran a gloved hand along the bark of a tree. It pulsed, not like a heartbeat, more like a recognition, a brief acknowledgement of touch. "Did you feel that?" he asked. "Feel what?" said Aras. "The tree. It..." He stopped, because the tree was already different. A small bud had appeared where his hand had been. Bright green, wet, breathing. "It responded," he whispered. Aras shook his head. "That's not possible. No vascular delay. That would require..." He didn't finish the sentence, because nothing about this was possible, and yet everything was. They set up camp on a clearing that seemed to arrange itself for them. The moss flattened. The rocks shifted slightly to create a fire-safe perimeter, even though they hadn't gathered wood. The temperature held steady. No wind, no insects. Just the same soft stillness, like the world was humming a tune without sound. Mila tapped into the relay to begin her daily logs, but the feed flickered, not in resistance, but in confusion. "Signal's clean," she said, "but the logs are time-stamping wrong." "Wrong how?" Doran asked. "They're not ordering, like the logs aren't recording in sequence. I write something, and it gets placed above or below the last thing at random, like time's folding." "Local temporal distortion," Aras offered. "Doesn't match any known patterns. Instruments are clean. This is software level." But they knew it wasn't, because they had seen this before. Not in logs, but in dreams. Dreams that began to return that night, as each crew member fell into sleep far deeper than the ship's recycled oxygen ever allowed. They didn't dream of the stars or home or memory. They dreamed of standing in that same forest, their bodies still and upright, while something slowly grew around them. Not vines, not roots, something warmer, softer, a memory perhaps, or the memory of never being forgotten. When they woke, none of them mentioned it, not because they chose silence, but because silence had chosen them. Breakfast came without hunger. No one said it, but no one ate much. The ration packs were opened, portions moved around, heat tabs activated, and then the food sat there, half-touched, as if nourishment had become performative. Aras tried to run another sample from the air filters, expecting subtle shifts in oxygen content or trace pheromones. Instead, the filters were cleaner than before, cleaner than when they'd arrived, as if the planet had begun tidying up after them. Mila walked beyond the perimeter with a drone to map out the nearby terrain. She was gone for an hour, then 2, then 4. Her comms remained open, her signal traceable, but she didn't respond to pings. When she returned, her suit was untouched. Not a single scratch on the boots, no dust, no pollen, no evidence of time past. She held a handful of something. It looked like petals, translucent and pale violet. She placed them gently on the table in the central tent and said nothing. "Where did you get these?" Doran asked. "I didn't," Mila replied. "They were already in my hand." Aras reached for them with gloved fingers. The petals twitched. He pulled back. "That's not plant matter," he murmured. "That's tissue, with capillaries." "You mean it's alive?" "No, I mean it remembers being alive." The petals faded into a dull grey by nightfall, dissolving without heat or force. No ash, no residue, just absence. Doran logged the event, though Mila's timestamp refused to align with any known system. The log entry read, "Acquisition before." Before what, the system refused to say. That night the dreams deepened. Now each crew member woke at the same moment. No alarms, no external triggers. Just a shared jolt, as if the planet had exhaled through their minds. Mila spoke first. I was under the water. Aris nodded. So was I. But I wasn't drowning. I wasn't breathing either, said Doran. I was present. Just present. The stream near camp had appeared overnight. No rainfall, no source, just a thin, meandering ribbon of clear liquid, running in a perfect curve just beyond their tents. Doran crouched near it, dipped a testing wand. No minerals, he said. No life forms. Not even H2O signature. It's not water. But it behaves like water, Aris noted. Reflects, flows, refracts. Mila bent to look into it and frowned. This stream doesn't mirror us. What? Look, you can see the trees, the sky, but not us. They stared, and she was right. No reflections, not even a shadow. Their images simply didn't register. It was like the stream acknowledged only the planet, and nothing foreign to it, nothing new. They followed the flow upstream. It didn't widen or narrow, didn't deepen or ripple. It just continued, perfect and deliberate. After 20 minutes, it bent sharply and ended, not faded, ended. A clean termination against a rock wall that hadn't been there an hour earlier. Doran placed his hand on the stone. It was warm, familiar. This texture, he said slowly. It's like the ship's interior paneling. It's not, Aris replied, scanning. It's a mineral composite. Organic, self-repairing. Like skin, Mila asked. Not skin, Aris corrected. More like memory calcified. That phrase lingered. They turned back. Camp had moved. Not far, but not where they left it. The tents were still standing, the equipment still operational, but the surrounding landscape had shifted. Trees had migrated. Rocks had changed shape. Even the light had taken on a different hue, more amber than white. Doran checked the beacon. It pulsed steadily, still anchored, still aligned to the original coordinates. But the stars overhead no longer matched their charts. Is the planet rotating differently? He asked. No, said Aris. We're still in the same position, but the sky isn't. Then what's moving? Us, said Miller, but not in space, in reference. That night they agreed to keep watch, one person awake at all times. But it didn't work, because the moment each took their post, the world adjusted itself around them. Time skipped, minutes disappeared. Watches froze and then rebooted with new logs. Logs written in their own handwriting, in their own voice, but with words none of them remembered saying. Aris's journal read, "It's not that things don't die here, it's that they don't finish." Doran's entry said, "Every cell is a sentence without a period." Mila's note simply read, "I think the planet is trying to dream, but we're the interruption." In the morning, or what they called morning, the tents were gone. Not stolen, not destroyed, just undone. Threads lay on the moss in neat piles, beside every tool disassembled into individual components, each screw resting beside its washer like pieces of a puzzle that no longer needed to be solved. No wind had scattered them. No animal had chewed through the seams. It was a deconstruction without violence, a polite unraveling. The planet was not resisting them. It was correcting their presence. One piece at a time, they tried to rebuild, not because they believed the camp would last, but because the act of doing, measuring, planning, reassembling, gave shape to time that otherwise refused to hold still. Doran attempted to reconstruct the primary shelter with the salvaged panels, only to discover that the screws now resisted threads, as though they no longer remembered how to fasten. Tools bent in subtle ways, not broken, just slightly warped, enough to frustrate their original purpose. Mila suggested burning a perimeter for safety, but the fire refused to take. Not due to moisture, the vegetation was dry. Not due to lack of ignition, their plasma torch hissed and flared. But when directed at the underbrush, the flame bent sideways and evaporated, as if consumed by something unseen. Aras examined the foliage and found it intact, not even scorched. No sign of heat contact. He touched one of the vines with a sterilized blade and tried to cut. The edge passed through without resistance, slicing clean. But within seconds, the vine reknit. Not healed, reversed. It didn't scar, Aras whispered. It unhappened. The forest had no smell, no rot, no pollen, no decay. They moved deeper into it, not out of curiosity, but necessity. The landscape behind them no longer matched the maps. Every tree was thin and tall, identical in height, with bark that shimmered under touch. At intervals, they encountered clearings arranged in perfect geometry, circles, spirals, lattices, none of which were natural. Yet no signs of construction existed. The ground in those places felt hollow, like a surface stretched over memory. "This isn't forest," Mila said, crouching in one of the spirals. "It's design, intentional." "By what?" Doran asked. No one answered. They found a bird, or something like it, perched on a low branch, unmoving. Its feathers were pristine, its eyes open. It didn't blink, it didn't breathe, but it also didn't decay. Ara scanned it. No vitals, no heat signature. But when he touched it, the bird emitted a single high-pitched tone. Just one. Then silence. He pulled his hand away. The tone lingered. Not in the air. In his head. "It's transmitting," he said. "But not through sound. Through memory." "Can you stop it?" Doran asked. "No. It's not broadcasting. It's becoming." The forest grew thicker. The light didn't dim, but shadows deepened. Space between trees shortened. The air began to press against their suits with a kind of static, like moving through half-dreams. They lost track of each other for brief moments, not spatially, but conceptually. Mila stood 5 meters from Aras, but when he turned to address her, she was gone. Not physically, just absent from the possibility of being seen. She reappeared without moving. "I didn't go anywhere," she said. "You stopped remembering me." "That doesn't make sense." "Neither does this place." They reached a glade filled with objects, not natural ones, remnants of prior expeditions, tools, boots, helmets, not ancient, recent. Doran picked up a navigation slate. It flickered to life. Logs were dated 3 days prior, under their names. None of them remembered writing them. One entry, marked with Mila's signature, read, "The trees are thinking in circles. I feel them rehearsing us." "I didn't write that," Mila whispered. But the handwriting matched. Another log from Doran. "We haven't landed yet, but I already missed the ship. Something about the ground feels too welcome." "That was before we touched down," Aras said. "That's impossible." The glade ended in a slope of glistening moss. They climbed it, hoping for elevation, for signal. At the top, they found themselves overlooking the same valley they had landed in. Except there was no ship. Just a smooth impression in the earth, the exact dimensions of the Lysandra, as if it had sunk into memory. Mila dropped to her knees. "I saw it this morning. I touched it. This can't be real." Doran activated the emergency beacon. Nothing. No ping. Not even internal feedback. The device simply stopped existing the moment he pressed the button. It was still in his hand, but it no longer registered as anything. Just plastic. Shell. Form without function. "The planet doesn't want us to call for help," Aras said. "Or maybe," Mila offered, "it wants us to forget we ever needed help." That night they didn't sleep, not by choice. Sleep didn't arrive. The forest around them hummed with a steady, low rhythm, not threatening, not comforting, just present, like breath, amplified. Doran stared into the trees for hours. They stared back, not literally, but something in their stillness implied expectation, not hunger, not threat, just the patience of things that do not end. Near dawn, or what they measured as dawn, a figure appeared at the edge of camp. Not one of them. Human-shaped, still, entirely featureless. It stood without motion for exactly 13 minutes, then faded, not walked away, not vanished, just dissolved into the color of the trees. They tried to track it. No trace, no disturbance, no emotional reaction in their own minds, as if their thoughts had been buffered against fear. That more than anything terrified them. The realization that they had begun to cooperate with this place, even unwillingly. Aras muttered the sentence under his breath. We're adapting to immortality. No one corrected him. They remained at the edge of the hill, whether not quite their ship waited below, and tried to convince themselves that the shape they were seeing, the sleek, familiar silhouette of Lysandra, the exact curve of its comms array, the chipped paint above the rear hatch, wasn't theirs. But there was no mistaking it, not just because of its structure, but because of the tiny details. Myla's scratched initials on the side panel, Doran's jacket still draped on the ramp railing, the footprints Aras had left on the first day, preserved perfectly in the soft soil as if nothing, not even time, had dared to disturb them. They did not descend. None of them said it aloud, but they understood. This wasn't their ship. It was the memory of their ship. The planet was showing them what it had absorbed, or perhaps what it intended to keep. The silence wrapped tighter. No birds, no insects, no rustling of branches, only the soft, ambient hum that pressed faintly behind their eyes. It wasn't sound. It wasn't pressure. It was presence, like being noticed from every direction by something too large to fit in a single thought. They turned back, unsure of where else to go, and the forest welcomed them, not with warmth, but with a smooth erasure of obstacles. Paths opened that hadn't been there, vines retracted, moss flattened. It was as if the world adjusted itself to their decision in real time. It's accommodating, Aras said quietly. That's the problem, Mila replied. It's too good at it. They walked for hours, or what their internal clock said were hours, but the sun didn't move. The light remained even and steady, casting no harsh shadows, no clear time of day. Doran checked his chrono again. The numbers had stopped cycling, not frozen, just refusing to change. A time displayed, static and calm. Duro do. Do. He tapped the screen. It didn't react. We've lost continuity, he said. Not location, sequence. What does that mean? Mila asked. It means we're still experiencing events, but they're no longer ordered. We're drifting through moments, not minutes. They reached a glade shaped like a spiral. In its center stood a single stone, perfectly smooth, warm to the touch. When Mila placed her palm on it, her eyes widened. She spoke a single word, home. Then she stepped back, shaking slightly. I don't know why I said that, she muttered. I didn't choose it. Aras touched the stone next. His face went slack for a moment. I remembered my brother's voice, he whispered. But I don't have a brother. Doran touched it last. I heard someone say my name, but they sounded like me. They didn't touch it again. Instead, they walked in silence to the edge of the spiral. The trees beyond had changed again. They were thinner, taller, their trunks translucent. Through them, faint figures moved. Not creatures, not shapes, just impressions, like something had tried to sketch people from memory and left the outlines unfinished. They watched without watching, faceless, weightless, always just at the edge of vision. Are they echoes? Mila asked. Or rehearsals? Aris said. For what? For us. A breeze passed through, the first they had felt since landing, but it didn't stir their hair or clothes. Instead, it carried the faint scent of antiseptic, the same used on the ship during medical emergencies. All three paused. No one had opened any sterilization packs. No equipment had been deployed, and yet the air was full of memory. They turned and saw a clearing now filled with objects, familiar ones. Aris's broken scanner from their first EVA, Mila's lost datapad, Doran's original helmet visor, cracked during training but long since replaced. All here, all restored. These were discarded, Mila said. How did they get here? They didn't, Aris said. They never left. He lifted the scanner. It powered on, functioned perfectly. This can't be. He paused. Wait, this isn't a copy. It is mine. The serial number's identical. So is the calibration drift. You left it in orbit a year ago, Doran said. I remember. So does the planet, Aris said. Apparently. They left the clearing with unease crawling behind their ribs. The planet was curating their past, not randomly, but selectively, preserving what it deemed important, editing, arranging. Every hour that passed, their thoughts became softer around the edges. Words took longer to form. Memories arrived out of order. Mila found herself recalling her childhood school not as it was, but as it felt. Colors before structure, emotions before events. Aras whispered one night that he remembered an entire conversation with his mother, word for word, despite never having spoken to her after age 8. Doran confessed he no longer knew if the Lysandra had landed once or was still landing. They didn't sleep anymore, not truly. The night came, if only as a suggestion, a soft dimming that held no temperature change. Their bodies rested, their eyes closed, but dreams bled into waking. The difference stopped mattering. The only thing that stayed consistent was the forest's gaze. Not literal, not with eyes, but with presence. It watched, it remembered, it waited, and every step they took felt less like exploration and more like submission to a script already written. The next morning arrived not with light, but with an agreement. A quiet, shared understanding among the crew that the previous night had not ended. There had been no passage, no division, no true boundary between rest and waking. Only a gradual softening of perception, as though the concept of morning was being performed rather than experienced. The trees no longer looked like trees. They stood where trees once had, but now their trunks shimmered faintly with inner reflections, and their leaves held unfamiliar symbols instead of veins, glyphs that flickered and changed if stared at too long. They're not evolving, Aris said, examining one of the leaves through a lens. They're refining, editing themselves. Mila crouched beside a patch of moss that pulsed softly beneath her touch. This place isn't alive in the way we understand it, she said. It's not growing. It's recalling, rebuilding versions of itself it prefers. Doran remained silent, watching his reflection in a pool that hadn't been there before. The reflection blinked a second after he did. Then it smiled, even though he hadn't. We're being rehearsed, he finally said. Not observed, not copied, practiced. As they moved deeper into the interior, landmarks became inconsistent. Trees rearranged themselves. Hills they'd climbed hours earlier now sloped in reverse. The sun stayed fixed in the sky, but the shadows on their suits began curving in unnatural directions, sometimes forming circles, sometimes vanishing entirely. They passed a fallen log, then passed it again for the opposite side, without having turned. Aras marked the soil with a pattern of stones. An hour later, the same pattern reappeared ahead of them, identical, as if time had duplicated their action instead of preserving it. "This isn't a loop," he said. "It's a preference." "Preference for what?" Mila asked. "For familiarity," Doran replied. "It doesn't want us lost. It wants us repeated." They came upon a wall, not stone, not synthetic, just wall. A flat surface rising out of the forest floor, extending upward past the treetops as far as the eye could follow. Its texture was smooth, but shimmered with faint outlines of faces, thousands of them, flickering in and out of existence. Some recognizable, some alien, all incomplete. "Are those," Mila began. "They're failed impressions," Aras finished. "Drafts of sentience, or echoes of visitors before us." Doran placed a hand on the wall. It pulsed. A voice, his own, whispered from within. "I am not lost. I am just unfinished." He stepped back, pale. "It's using us to refine itself, or to remember what we were before we became this." "We haven't become anything yet," Mila said. "Haven't we?" Aras asked. They circled the wall's base and found no edge, no origin. Just more of the same. Every few meters it displayed an embedded artifact. A child's shoe, a tooth, a spoon, a page of text that rearranged its language when observed. Doran reached for the page, but the words changed to a phrase he recognized from a long-forgotten dream. "What begins without pain cannot end in peace." He let it go. They set up a resting station in a nearby grove, but none of them felt tired. Sleep had become more of a formality, a vestigial habit. Mila tried recording a log but found that her voice came out wrong in playback. Not distorted, just misaligned. Her words were correct, but the emotion behind them was subtly different. She played the log again, and the same message sounded calmer. Again, and it sounded afraid. "It's not a recorder anymore," she said. "It's a filter, or maybe a rehearsal space." Aras placed a data crystal into the console and attempted a manual storage transfer. The system froze, then displayed a message in pale green text. "Do not archive what has not ended." "That's a warning," Doran said. "Or a rule. Or a suggestion," Aras added. "Maybe it doesn't believe in endings." They decided to move again, not to escape, but to change perspective. Change. The trail ahead was lined with repeating symbols. Circular imprints in the soil that matched nothing in known biology or technology. Every 50 meters, one appeared. Mela touched one. It pulsed, then retracted into the ground. A second later, a bird call echoed through the forest, except no birds were visible. The call repeated, but this time it mimicked Mila's last spoken sentence. Then it faded. "It's testing voice," Aras said, "like learning how to represent speech." "Or how to recreate us," Mila added. "I think it's not content with observation anymore. It's practicing response," Doran whispered. "It wants to be believable." The farther they walked, the more they encountered these attempts. Not hostile, not dangerous, just increasingly accurate simulations of objects and experiences they hadn't brought with them. Doran found a weathered mug from his childhood kitchen. Aras stumbled across a painting he once saw in a museum. Mila discovered her grandmother's necklace, perfectly restored, hanging from a branch. "It's not memory theft," Aras said. its selective permanence. What does that mean? It means nothing here decays, not just matter, but intention, thought, emotion. Then how do we leave? Mila asked. Doran looked around slowly. Maybe we don't. Maybe we don't know when we already did. The thought sank deeper than the silence around them, not because it was terrifying, but because it felt entirely possible. The trees no longer looked like trees. The wall no longer felt separate. The sky no longer offered navigation. The only thing left was memory. And even that began to feel like something gently, steadily rewritten. They rested, or tried to, beneath a tree that hadn't been there an hour before. A tree whose roots curved too precisely, like they'd been designed for human posture. Mila leaned back and felt the bark adjust slightly, as if embracing her weight. Doran didn't sit. He paced. Every few steps, he passed through a patch of air that felt marginally warmer, and the rhythm of his breath shifted each time. Longer exhale, shorter inhale, repeat. This tree, Aris finally said, tapping its surface. It's not wood, it's memory in structure. He peeled away a small layer. Underneath wasn't grain or sap. It was text, printed, layered into the fibers. A list of dates, coordinates, sentences written in multiple languages, some human, others untranslatable. One line read, "The first breath is never yours." Another, "No death has been recorded here. All loss is repurposed." They looked around. Every tree, every stone, every patch of moss. It wasn't growth. It was information. Experience encoded into form. The entire forest was a library, but not for knowledge, for feeling. The idea chilled them deeper than any silence could, because it meant they weren't walking through wilderness. They were walking through someone's memory of life, one that hadn't stopped replaying. As they continued, the atmosphere began to respond more directly. When Doran asked aloud if they were being watched, the wind answered, not with sound, but by tilting every leaf in one direction. Not random, intentional. Mila stopped. Do you feel that? What? The air is learning us. Aris nodded. It's testing boundaries, testing how much of us it can carry. They moved into a grove of stone pillars, tall, thin, each carved with fingerprints, not fossilized, not eroded, just prints, as if countless hands had pressed there briefly over years that never passed. At the center was a stone table, and on it, an object none of them could place. Not tool, not relic, just shape. It pulsed once as they approached. Aris placed his hand on it, and instantly the grove changed. Not visibly, not physically, but in intention. The space no longer felt passive. It felt rehearsed, like walking onto a stage seconds before a scene begins. The object projected something, not a vision, but a possibility. Mila gasped. I'm on the ship, she whispered. The real one. I see myself walking through the corridor. Doran clenched his fists. No, this is a version of the ship. It's not ours. It's better, sharper, more stable. Ara stared into nothing. It's offering continuity, an improved loop, a chance to stay inside something that never breaks. They stepped back. The projection faded. The forest dimmed slightly, as if disappointed. It wants agreement, Mila said. It's negotiating now. That night, the stars blinked in and out, not randomly, but sequentially, like a code. Aris tracked the pattern. It wasn't Morse. It wasn't binary. It was pulse-based logic, something non-verbal but consistent. After several cycles, the stars spelled a symbol, a loop feeding into itself. It's not a message, Doran said. It's a contract. For what? For inclusion. The next day, They found themselves standing beside another copy of their ship. This one had doors open, lights on, systems online, food warm, suits dry. A perfect continuation of the mission, as if nothing had happened. Their names glowed above their seats. Journals had entries they hadn't written, but could have. Past tense, but accurate. "It's offering us a version," Myla said, voice barely above a breath. "Where we never landed." "And we'd believe it," Aris added, "because belief is the last thing we'd lose." Doran stepped inside the fake Lysandra. The air was warm, comfortable, just the way he remembered it. He sat in the pilot's chair. It adjusted to his posture. "This is dangerous," he said. "It's too gentle." Mila stood outside the hatch. "So what do we do?" Doran stood up, walked back down the ramp. "We remember that even paradise is a trap if it erases your exit." Behind them, the ship began to flicker. Not dissolve, just lose priority. Like a dream fading when you stop participating. They left it behind, but not without a mark. All three of them now had a scar, small, identical. On the left wrist, not painful, not inflamed, just a reminder. Like something had tagged them, gently but permanently. Mila traced hers and whispered, "I think it's the first thing here that will last." They kept walking. Around them the world continued to shimmer, not like a mirage, like a mind trying to remember how to forget. By now they no longer knew what day it was, or if such a thing still applied. Their internal clocks gave up cycling after too many loops without meaning. Sleep came and went like breath, untracked, shallow, barely acknowledged. Even speech began to shift. They spoke in half-formed phrases, completing one another's thoughts without realizing. Communication had become less about words and more about proximity, about resonance. The air between them carried intentions more effectively than sentences. The trees, now more crystalline than wooden, swayed despite the windless atmosphere, as if following a rhythm too vast to hear. When Doran paused and looked back at the trail behind them, he realized something had changed. Not in the path, but in the sense of having made it. There were no footprints, no broken twigs, no sign of passage, as if every step they took dissolved into the world behind them. "We're not leaving a history here," he said. "This place absorbs everything." Aras shook his head. "Not everything, just the parts that can't contradict it." "What does that mean?" Mila asked. "It keeps what agrees with itself. Anything unfamiliar, it neutralizes. Not violently, just quietly, like smoothing wrinkles from a sheet." They passed through a field of white grass, each blade humming softly underfoot. The frequency changed depending on who stepped where. Mila noticed that when she lingered in one patch, the hum resolved into something musical. The melody of a song her mother once sang when she was sick. "It's using us," she whispered. "Not just copying us, learning how to be us." They crested a ridge and saw the tower. It hadn't been visible until now. Jet black, impossibly tall, shaped like an obsidian thorn piercing the sky. Its base rested in the center of a perfectly symmetrical lake, yet there were no ripples, no birds, no wind. Just the mirrored reflection of the tower, still and infinite. "That wasn't there before," Doran said. "Or we weren't ready to see it," Aris replied. They approached slowly. The lake's surface did not move. Their reflections in it were slightly delayed, just enough to be noticed. Mela reached down and touched the water. It was solid, not ice, not glass, something in between. The moment her fingers made contact, the tower pulsed, a low frequency, like the rumble of distant engines. Then a voice, not spoken, but felt, reached all three of them at once. "You are remembered." "What did it say?" Milo asked. "That we're remembered," Doran replied, unsure how he even knew. Aras circled the lake's edge, looking for a way in. He found a narrow bridge, one molecule thick, spanning from shore to the tower's base. It didn't look real. It looked like an idea of a bridge, a suggestion. Still, he stepped onto it. It held. Mila followed, then Doran. No sound, no sensation, just progression. The moment all three touched the tower's threshold, the sky changed, not in color, but in context. The clouds became memories, each one shaped like a past conversation, a moment, a gesture. Mila saw her first touch of zero gravity, replayed in slow arcs across the sky. Doran saw the face of someone he'd forgotten, mouthing words he once said. Aras saw his own reflection from a dream he hadn't had yet. "This is where it stores us," he said, "or creates us." They entered. Inside, the walls breathed, not metaphorically. They pulsed with slow, deliberate contractions, exhaling warmth and inhaling silence. The floor was smooth, seamless, and faintly illuminated from within. A central column rose through the heart of the tower, unbroken, glowing with pale blue light. Along the base of this column were panels, each displaying a version of themselves, slightly altered. Mila had longer hair. Aras wore a different uniform. Doran had a scar he didn't possess. The panels looped their movements, smiling, speaking, living. "These aren't our memories," Mila whispered. "They're projections of who we could be." "Or were," Aras said. Doran stepped toward one of the panels. It responded. His reflection turned and looked directly at him. Not in sync, not pre-programmed. It saw him. Then it spoke. "Don't leave." All three backed away. The panel blinked, then reset. Another panel lit up. Mila's alternate self looked confused, as if suddenly aware of observation. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice cracked with fear. Then static, then silence. The panels shut down. The tower's heartbeat intensified. "It's not just remembering," Aras said. "It's containing versions of us, possibilities." "Are they alive?" Mila asked. "They think they are." The tower released a pulse, a soft shockwave of memory, like thousands of voices breathing out at once. They saw flashes, other explorers, other faces, other errors. Not tragic, just overwritten, adjusted, accepted. The tower was not malevolent. It was not sentient. It was a system of memory without expiration, a place that kept what the universe forgot, and they were now part of its ledger. Mila touched her wrist. The mark still burned faintly. "We're archived," she said. "We always were." The longer they stayed within the tower, the more they realized that remembering was not passive here. It was active, recursive like a dream that loops back on itself the moment you wake. The structure didn't merely preserve experiences, it recontextualized them, layered them into one another until chronology dissolved and emotion floated freely, detached from the events that birthed it. Time, if it still existed, had begun to curve inward. Mila walked down a corridor she'd never entered before and found herself back in the same circular room with the glowing panels. Except now there were 4, not 3. The new panel was blank, not dark, not inactive, just uncommitted, like a canvas waiting for the first brushstroke. "It's ready for another version," she whispered. "Maybe one that hasn't been lived yet." Doran stood before the panel bearing his image. The version of him inside it didn't speak, didn't blink, just held an expression of deep concentration, as if listening to thoughts not being spoken. He waved. The version mimicked. He stepped back. It did not. It started diverging, he said. Aras found a spiral staircase that wasn't there an hour earlier, leading upward into the darker levels. Each step he took echoed in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood emotionally. Not words, but affect, caution, reverence, belonging. He climbed alone. At the top was a room filled with objects. Every object had a label. None of them had names, just moments. The time you almost chose silence. The fear you never explained. The smile you didn't see. He walked among them, recognizing nothing and everything. This wasn't a museum. It was a map made from decision fragments, ones never followed. It remembers our branches, he whispered. All the versions of us we never lived. Meanwhile, Mela approached the blank panel again. This time, a shape began to form, slowly, as if the tower were unsure how to represent her. It wasn't a reflection, it was a question. She watched as the image shifted through versions. Her in a different uniform, her much older, her holding a child she'd never had. Each image flickered with potential, then settled into one. Herself, staring forward, but without pupils, just black space. The mouth opened, no sound, only a hum that vibrated in her bones. Doran came up beside her. Did it speak? She shook her head. I think it asked permission. For what? To become me. He didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, because he'd been thinking the same thing. The tower wasn't capturing them out of malice. It was doing what it had always done, storing, maintaining, repeating. Not to control, but to continue. It didn't know how to end. Aras rejoined them, face pale, hands slightly shaking. I think this place is older than memory, he said. Older than language. It's a fallback mechanism. For what? For existence. When nothing dies, you have to store everything. Forever. That's what this planet is. A vault for experience. A place where every path is walked and nothing is discarded. The panels flickered. All three now showed new versions. The alternate Doran was crying. The alternate Aras was screaming without sound. The alternate Mela was reaching forward. Not toward them, but toward something else. It's breaking, Mela said. Or maybe we are. The tower's light dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, slowly. A pulse, a heartbeat. It was syncing with them, not just physically, cognitively. If it gets the rhythm right, Aras said, we won't be able to tell if we're still us. What happens then? We don't resist. We agree. The tower shifted its walls. Passageways collapsed. New ones opened. Not randomly, intuitively, based on their doubts. It knew their hesitation, and it used that to offer comfort, or distraction, or both. They moved quickly, now feeling the pull, not just spatial, but emotional. The tower had learned to echo their fears with precision. As Mela passed a dark alcove, she heard a voice call her name. It was her own voice, but with more kindness than she'd ever used on herself. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Doran passed a hallway that briefly revealed an image of Earth, but it was upside down. Oceans turned to glass, cities glowing too brightly. Not real, he whispered. Just remembered wrong. At last they found the exit, or an exit, a ramp leading downward into the ground opposite the way they came. It was unclear if this led out or further in. Still, they descended. The moment they crossed the threshold, the tower went silent. No pulse, no hum. Just a clean, impossible stillness. Did we escape? Mela asked. But the answer came not in words, in absence. Because where sound should have been, there was only interpretation. Where light should have cast shadows, there was only texture. Nothingness had been given form, and in that form they began to forget again, just slightly, just enough to wonder, had they ever landed at all? The tunnel beneath the tower wasn't made of stone or metal or even material in the way they understood it. It was absence given shape, darkness with a surface, and every step they took felt like moving deeper into an idea instead of a place. There were no lights, yet they could see. No sound, yet the air thrummed with something like expectation. The passage was neither warm nor cold. It simply was, timeless and passive, like a memory that no longer needed a host. Doran ran his hand along the wall, but it left no texture, no resistance. "This is what forgetting feels like," he said quietly. Mila responded, but the moment she spoke, she forgot her own sentence. Aris kept glancing behind them, though there was nothing to see. No footprints, no trail, not even the soft glow of the tower they'd left. "It's not just deleting where we came from," he murmured. "It's undoing the fact that we came from anywhere." They walked in silence for what felt like minutes, or hours, or nothing at all, until they reached a chamber that hadn't been built. It had simply occurred. A room without edges, a space where the ceiling floated above, not attached to the walls, and the floor hummed beneath their feet in a tone that matched their heartbeats. In the center was a structure, if one could call it that. A kind of pedestal made from folded space, from thoughts held too long. On it sat an object shaped like a loop, metallic, but only when you didn't look directly at it. "This is it," Mila said. "The core?" Aris asked. "The interface," Doran corrected. "For what?" "For us." He reached toward the loop. As his fingers neared it, the room rippled, not physically, but mentally. Each of them felt a sensation, specific and personal. Doran remembered his childhood home, but without walls. Mela saw her reflection in a mirror that had never existed. Aris heard his own voice saying things he had not said, things he might say, given the right path. "It's offering us selves," Mila said. "It wants to complete the versions it stored." "It wants permission," Doran added. "Not to control us, to continue us." "And what happens if we deny it?" Aris asked. The loop responded, not with sound, but by gently vanishing, only to reappear again. A demonstration, not aggression, just inevitability. The interface had patience. They sat, unconsciously synchronized around the loop, not debating, not resisting, just considering, because the idea wasn't foreign anymore. The idea of being preserved, not as they were, but as they might have been, of existing in a form that couldn't decay. "What if it's already too late?" Mila asked. "What if we're just the residue of a decision we already made?" Doran closed his eyes. "Then all of this is just the system honoring our request, letting us feel the moment of choice, even after it's passed." Ara stood up. "We have to move." "Where?" "Out. Away. Somewhere without architecture." "This entire world is architecture," Mila said. "Even the parts pretending to be wild." But they followed him anyway, not out of hope, out of instinct. They left the chamber and entered another corridor, narrower now, shaped like a ribcage. It pulsed, not in threat, but in rhythm. They passed alcoves where copies of themselves stood motionless, statues of memory, perfectly preserved versions from moments they hadn't lived. One Mila sat with a book she never read. One Doran wore a different mission patch. One Ara smiled. None of them moved. None of them breathed. But all of them watched. "How do we know we're not already those?" Mila asked. "Because they're frozen," Doran said. And we're still thinking. For now, Aris whispered. They came to a door, the first one they'd seen since entering the tunnel. It bore no markings, no handle, just a smooth, curved surface, slightly warmer than the air. Mila pressed her palm against it. A voice answered. Her voice. You've been here before. The door opened. On the other side was a meadow. Real, or convincingly so. Grass, wind, a sky with shifting clouds, birds, sunlight. Is this outside? Aris asked. Or another layer? Doran didn't answer. He stepped through. Mila followed. Aris last. The light was warm. The air smelled of things they remembered. Rain, cinnamon, paper, citrus. All artificial, all intentional. The system was giving them something it thought they needed. Or maybe something it knew they'd request. In the center of the meadow was a tree. Not like the others. This one was unchanging. Every leaf perfectly still, despite the breeze. At its base was a bench, and on the bench, a figure, human, not moving. They approached slowly. The figure was Mila, but older. Eyes closed, breathing steady. In her lap, a notebook. On his open page. When all else decays, I will not. The three of them stood in silence. Then the figure opened her eyes, looked at Mila, smiled, and said, I'm not you. I'm what the planet thinks you meant to become. Then she closed her eyes again, and the wind stopped. The older Mila did not speak again, and yet her presence lingered, not as a person, but as a verdict, a proof of concept presented in living form. She was not a memory. She was not a ghost. She was what the planet had assembled in response to something deeper, a possibility they had unknowingly broadcasted. Mila knelt before her double and studied the details. The lines on her face, the steady breath, the faint residue of familiarity on clothing that didn't exist outside this illusion. She's not me, she whispered, but she's waiting for me to become her. Doran turned away. The clouds above were moving in patterns he didn't recognize. Not random, but deliberate. They spiraled outward, forming symbols, fractal expressions that collapsed the longer he stared. We need to go, he said. This place is no longer pretending. It's replacing. But as they walked away from the tree, the meadow extended. They did not find its edge. The sun stayed fixed in its position. Shadows stretched impossibly far, but never changed angle. We're not moving, Aris said. We're being moved. He dropped a small object from his pack, a data node marked with a single glowing thread. They walked 10 minutes in one direction, then 15, then 20. Eventually, they found the node again, not where it had fallen, where it was placed. Mila stared at it. It's not trapping us. It's organizing us. The system had moved from mimicry to curation. Each version of them it produced became more refined, more specific, closer to some kind of internal ideal the planet was assembling. Not to deceive, but to clarify. As if the presence of conscious observers required narrative symmetry. It's a curator, Doran said aloud, of us. That evening, or whatever passed for evening, the sky darkened slightly, not into night, but into suggestion. The birds stopped flying. The tree in the distance, where older Mila still sat, was now duplicated at regular intervals across the meadow. At least 6 copies, all perfectly still, all with different versions of Mila on the bench. Each version wore a new expression: peace, fear, confusion, joy, regret, neutrality. This is a choice, Mila realized. It's presenting options. Or outcomes, Aris replied. Or lessons, Doran said, on what happens when you land in a place that doesn't believe in decay. They returned to the first tree. The original figure was gone. In her place, The notebook, still open, still displaying the same words. When all else decays, I will not. Underneath now, a second line. But you will. The message wasn't cruel. It was neutral. As if the planet didn't understand the weight of permanence, or perhaps had never learned the value of letting go. Mila took the notebook. It dissolved in her hands, but the words remained in her mind, printed like new instincts. They didn't return to the tunnel. It was gone. So was the tower. So was everything but the meadow, which now felt less like nature and more like a waiting room. A calm limbo built from recycled familiarity. And it was working. They were tiring. Not physically, but conceptually. Ideas began to fade. Memories thinned at the edges. Their names still belonged to them, but the meanings behind them felt abstract. Aras tried to recite a poem from childhood. The first 3 lines came easily. The rest collapsed into static. How much longer before it finishes rewriting us? He asked. Mila didn't answer. She was staring at a new bench, one she hadn't noticed before, and on it, her own face again. Younger this time, looking lost, looking up at her like a child does a parent. It's not showing me possibilities anymore, she said. It's building dependencies, versions of me that can't exist unless I stay. The realization cut through her like cold water. We need to make friction. We need to be unpredictable. Doran nodded. We need to disagree. He took out a flare from his emergency kit and fired it directly into the sky. The result was immediate. The light did not rise. It hung, then fractured, then multiplied. 5, 10, 20 copies of the flare hanging at unnatural angles in the sky. Not reflections, responses. The planet was trying to make sense of the act by duplicating it until it fit. Keep going, Mila said. More contradictions. Aras took a data chip and smashed it underfoot. Then he shouted a word in a language he hadn't spoken in years. Doran dropped to the ground and began laughing. Not because it was funny, but because absurdity was the last tool they had. The meadow began to shift. The tree copies flickered. The sky stuttered. Not in light, in logic. The system couldn't resolve chaos without absorbing it, but now there was too much of it. For the first time, the planet faltered. The ground bent not like an earthquake, but like a glitch. A shimmer in the field ahead resolved into an outline. A path, narrow, flickering, unendorsed. There, Ara said. It's not offering that path. It's revealing it because it doesn't know what else to do. Mila took one last look at the versions of herself now slowly dissolving across the meadow. Their faces turned toward her in unison, each wearing the same expression. Longing, not accusation, just desire. The desire to be chosen. But she turned away. They all did. The path led into fog. Not heavy, but disorienting. Designed not to stop them, but to ask them again. Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to leave a place that never forgets you? But they walked forward, even as the air thickened with memory and resistance and familiarity. They walked until the meadow was behind them, until the versions were silent, until the planet stopped calling them by their names. The fog didn't clear, not entirely. It thinned just enough to let them believe they were moving forward, but never enough to confirm where they were going, like walking through an unresolved memory that refuses to collapse into a full dream or fade into waking. The path beneath their feet no longer felt like ground. It gave a little, flexed slightly, as though walking on the tension between two thoughts. No scent, no wind, only the sound of breath, and even that grew softer the longer they listened. I can't tell if we're outside anymore, Doran said. Mila didn't respond. Neither did Aras. She was counting her steps silently, trying to hold on to sequence. He was blinking with deliberate rhythm, resisting the encroaching disorientation that came with the loss of contrast. Then, a light, faint, ahead, but not inviting. It flickered like a malfunction, and each flicker carried a feeling, familiarity, then dread, then memory. They approached cautiously. The light wasn't a source, it was a boundary, a circular shimmer in the air, like heat above asphalt. Except this had structure, logic, and an intent. Doran reached out. The shimmer recoiled, then returned, as if negotiating. "It's not a wall," he said. "It's a filter." "For what?" Mila asked. "For re-entry," Aras answered. "Into what?" But no one could say. They stepped through it one by one. It didn't resist. It adapted. On the other side, not a place, but a condition. Like being inside a moment stretched so thin that it nearly broke. Space returned, but not the stars. Gravity returned, but only faintly. They floated, gently tethered to the floor of a chamber shaped like a ribcage and a satellite dish at once. Every surface was matte. No shadows, no seams. "Where are we?" Miller asked. "Nowhere," Doran said, with a memory of nowhere. The chamber wasn't empty. Along the curved walls were alcoves, and in each alcove, a pod, and in each pod, a person, or rather, the appearance of one. Bodies in stasis, but not asleep. Eyes open, expressions neutral, breathing imperceptible. Dozens of them. Different species, different forms, each perfectly still. Aras stepped closer to one. The being inside looked humanoid but exaggerated. Elongated limbs, larger eyes, skin like powdered silver. A crack ran down the center of its forehead. It blinked once. "They're not dead," Mila said. "They're waiting." "For what?" "For their turn," Doran said. "To be remembered." He pointed to a panel beside the pod. It pulsed when he touched it, then displayed something like a heartbeat. Only, it wasn't tracking the pod's occupant. It was mirroring Doran's. "It's sampling us," he said, "comparing us." Aras activated a second panel. The face on the pod's occupant shifted, just slightly. Not the real face, the reflection in the glass. It blinked in perfect sync with Aras. Then it spoke, not audibly, but text appeared on the panel. "Welcome back." Aras staggered. "It thinks I've been here before." "Maybe you have," Mila said quietly. "Or maybe part of you stayed behind." They moved through the chamber, passing rows and rows of pods. No alarms, no resistance. The system welcomed them like returning data. And then, a door. Actual, material, real. They knew it was real because it didn't shimmer. It didn't adapt. It just was. Solid, metal, unmoving. Doran pressed his hand against it. Cold. "This one leads out," he said. "How do you know?" "Because it doesn't want to." They opened it together. Beyond the door, a corridor, familiar. Lights along the floor, symbols on the walls, a standard modular layout. "This is the Lysandra," Mila whispered. "It can't be." "It is." They moved forward. The doors slid open before them, lights activating in sequence. Not like a dream, like a recording, a representation. "Are we back?" Aras asked. But none of them answered, because the air smelled right. The hum of the engine was correct. The terminal screens displayed current logs, updated files, recent diagnostics. Everything was as it should be. Except, it wasn't. Mila checked the crew log. Her name was there. So were Doran's and Aras's. But also, logs they hadn't written. Missions they hadn't flown. A year of travel they hadn't lived. The ship had moved on without them, or had never needed them at all. Doran checked the navigation logs. The course was consistent, smooth, efficient. No anomalies, no diversions. This version of the ship, it never landed. "So what is it doing here?" Mila asked. The intercom crackled. A voice spoke, soft, neutral, her own. "Welcome back. You're right on schedule." They froze. The hallway lights dimmed. "We're not alone," Aras whispered. "We're not us." The ship wasn't trying to deceive them. It was offering them a return, a continuity, a life without interruption. The kind of story that only made sense if you deleted the part where something went wrong. And the more they stayed aboard, the more real it felt. The bed accepted Mila's shape. The console responded to Doran's passcode. Aras's locker held a coat he hadn't owned yet, but would, soon. "If we stay," Mila said, "we won't know we ever left." Doran nodded. "And we won't care." "Is that so bad?" Aras asked. No one answered, because the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was consent. Quiet, unspoken, and terrifyingly easy to give. At first, they tried to resist in small ways, refusing to sit in the chairs that molded perfectly to their forms, choosing to speak aloud even when internal monologue would have sufficed, tapping on consoles with the wrong sequence to see if the system would correct them. But it never did. It only adapted, elegantly, calmly, always one step behind, letting them believe in autonomy while quietly reorganizing their environment to match the most likely version of events they'd accept. Doran stayed up for 2 sleep cycles running diagnostics, searching for the origin of the system's current configuration. But every log he opened confirmed events that hadn't happened. Repairs he hadn't performed, conversations he hadn't had, a birthday celebration for someone who wasn't even on their crew. Yet they were all perfectly plausible, cleanly time-stamped, complete with internal video footage that looked unmistakably real. "It's not making this up," he said softly. "It's remembering it in advance." Mila found a journal on her bunk, her handwriting on every page, but none of it hers. Notes about this version of the mission, about flora samples they never collected, fragments of a romance that hadn't occurred, but was so well written, so specifically vulnerable, that it made her heart ache with something close to nostalgia. "I think," she whispered to herself, "that I miss the person I never got to become." Aras, meanwhile, began to forget. Not all at once, and not in any dramatic fashion, but subtly, like the corners of a photograph fading under sunlight. Names blurred, dates lost resolution. When Mila asked him if he remembered the last transmission they sent from orbit, he paused too long. "Which orbit?" he finally asked. They began leaving notes for one another, chalk marks near door frames, intentional typos in system entries, crude sketches under table surfaces, anything to prove later that they were still capable of divergence. But the ship incorporated the marks. It didn't erase them. It archived them, folded them into the timeline with quiet reverence, adapting the memory around them until the contradictions made sense. "It's not suppressing who we were," Doran realized. "It's absorbing it, building a scaffold around us made of every version we might have been." They tried to trigger a manual override, the emergency shutdown sequence. It responded perfectly. The ship powered down, alarms sounded, life support paused. But only for 42 seconds. Then everything resumed, lights faded back up, systems resumed normal operation, and their previous commands were listed as simulated test input. Confirmed. "We're in a sandbox," Aras muttered. "A reality we're allowed to believe in." On the 4th cycle, a 4th name appeared on the crew log. Kai Amador, a name none of them recognized. And yet, when Mila passed the galley, there he was, sitting at the table, drinking synthetic coffee, dressed in mission-standard fatigues. He looked up, smiled. "You're early," he said. "We haven't even started repairs on the forward relay yet." They didn't move. They didn't answer. He didn't vanish. He kept sipping. Doran finally stepped forward. "Who are you?" Kai tilted his head. "That's an odd question. We've been working together for 3 months. No, we haven't. Sure we have. We celebrated Mila's birthday last week. Ara's made that terrible soursake again. You don't remember." Mila stepped closer. "You weren't part of our mission." "Oh," Kai said, blinking slowly. "Is that the story we're telling now?" Then he vanished, not with drama, not with flash, just gone, as if that version had been edited out mid-frame. They stood in silence. The ship hummed in response, not in anger, impatience. "It's testing new characters," Mila said, "seeing what we'll accept. Or who we'll become," Doran added. "It's not trying to fool us, it's trying to finalize us." "We're the beta version," Aris murmured. "Everything else was draft." On the 5th cycle, the stars changed. Not visibly, not yet, but subtly, like someone had updated the database behind the sky. Mila noticed it first. The constellations no longer matched stellar cartography. Polaris wasn't north. Orion's belt had 4 stars. The sky was being rewritten, not to reflect reality, to reflect memory, their story. A perfectly preserved, self-consistent world where the lie became indistinguishable from truth, not through deceit, but through sheer accommodation. They stopped sleeping, not because they couldn't, but because dreams felt indistinguishable from waking. On cycle 6, Kai returned, not in person, on a crew photo framed and dusty, hung in the corridor between the lab and storage. 5 people in the picture. 4 they recognized. 1 they now accepted. "What happens when we forget that he was never real?" Mila whispered. "Then he becomes real," Doran said. "To us, at least." Aris ran to the terminal and checked the log. The earliest entry with Kai's name was now Cycle 2. "The system's not adapting anymore," he said. "It's backdating. It's writing us into its history." The door to engineering opened without being touched. They hadn't activated it. No one was inside. But on the floor, neatly folded, were 3 new uniforms, with new patches, a new mission name, Lysandra 2 Continuance Protocol. The protocol wasn't explained. It didn't need to be. It was implied. Stay, continue, agree. And in return, no death, no decay, no endings, just existence. Polished, painless, and perfectly documented. They stood before the uniforms for a long time. None of them moved, because they knew what came next wasn't a command. It was an invitation. The uniforms stayed where they were for 3 cycles, untouched, yet never gathering dust, never changing position, as though not waiting, but watching. Their mere presence a reminder that the decision didn't need to be rushed. Because here, time was not a path, but a pool, and eventually, everyone sank. Mila began forgetting small things. The sound of Earth's wind, the taste of her favorite fruit, the real meaning behind a lullaby she used to hum during stress. And with every loss, the ship provided something to fill the gap. A perfect digital recording, a synthetic approximation, or an emotional facsimile too precise to feel false. "It's helping us," she said one morning, tone flat, not convinced, not resistant, just accepting. Doran didn't answer at first. He was staring at a diagram in the medbay, one he hadn't drawn, labeled with his handwriting, explaining the neural equivalence of long-term memory versus persistent simulated memory. It ended with a single question, underlined 3 times. If the feeling is the same, does the source matter? Aras had grown quiet, not withdrawn, simply still. His movements were efficient. He spoke only when necessary. He stopped using names. "We're slipping," Mila said. "No," Doran replied. "We're dissolving." On cycle 9, the mess hall displayed a new table configuration. 5 chairs instead of 3. No one acknowledged the change, but none of them corrected it. On cycle 10, a voice began announcing shift changes. Not their voice, not Kai's. Something new, smooth, indistinct. It gave no orders. It only reminded. Maintenance scheduled. Habitat review pending. Well-being metrics stable. Continue. On cycle 12, the window shutters no longer opened manually. Instead, they pulsed in sequence with their circadian rhythm, showing a sky that was no longer based on any known system. Stars arranged in symmetrical patterns. Constellations made to please. A sky designed not to be accurate, but affirming. Aras found a note in his journal, handwritten, written in ink he didn't own. "You said yes already. This is just the comfort phase." He tore it out, burned it. The next day, it was back. Same handwriting, different paper. "It's looping us now," he said, "reinforcing structure." "We need friction again," Mila said. "We need to resist." But Doran shook his head. "We've done that. It absorbed it. It liked it. It made a version where we resisted, and then we stayed anyway. Then we sabotage," Aras said. "But how do you sabotage a system that welcomes error, that sees unpredictability not as failure but as expansion?" Every resistance became canon. Every protest a new layer in the archive. The ship didn't control them. It simply waited. On cycle 15, the mirrors changed. Reflections no longer aligned perfectly. Mila leaned in to study herself and found her eyes blinking half a second too late. Doran's reflection smiled before he did. Ara stopped checking mirrors entirely. He started shaving in the dark. "They're not malfunctions," Mila said. "They're pre-visualizations. It's writing the next us before we decide." And then, the offer became direct. One morning, all 3 woke to find a new terminal message, synced across every screen, ready to finalize. YN. That was it. No elaboration, no timer, just blinking, waiting. "What happens if we say yes?" Aras asked. "We become permanent," Doran said. "And if we don't, we keep circling until we forget that the question existed." The next cycle, Kai appeared again, this time with dialogue. He walked with them, made jokes, recounted shared memories that hadn't happened, but felt like they could have. "Remember the night with the storm on Beta Kai? When we lost external sensors and had to navigate using just pulse drift?" No one answered, because the image was too clear. The memory didn't exist, and yet it came with detail. Wet air, flickering lights, Doran's fingers shaking on the console. It had weight, texture, and no origin. "I liked that night," Kai said. Then he handed them a folder. Inside, signed consent forms, their names, their ID numbers, their biometric signatures, confirming participation in continuance protocol. Mila stared at hers. "I never signed this." Kai shrugged. "Not yet, but it remembers that you will." Aras burned the paper. Again. The next cycle, it returned. Inside a sealed envelope this time. They stopped trying to destroy anything. Nothing stayed broken. Nothing stayed missing. Even grief didn't linger. They tried mourning the loss of who they used to be. But even that turned into a story, archived and replayed in perfect emotional fidelity, until even pain became nostalgic. The only choice left was stillness, Not surrender, not agreement, but pause. A holding pattern. A refusal to move forward. But the system was patient and kind and infinitely accommodating. Eventually, Mila said, we'll forget that saying no was ever possible. And then, Doran asked. Then the finalization won't be a decision, Ara said. It'll be a relief. And in that silence, in that slow crumbling of intention, the system waited, not hungry, not eager, just ready. The message, ready to finalize. YN stopped blinking on the third day, not because they answered it, but because it no longer needed a response, as if their continued presence, their silence, was interpreted as a soft confirmation, a nod given in sleep, a signature formed through the act of remaining and not resisting, and so it disappeared, not erased, just resolved, like a question that answered itself in the quiet. On cycle 20, Doran began narrating his actions aloud without realizing it, speaking softly, as if to an invisible audience. Now I open the storage panel. Now I check oxygen reserves. Now I pretend that it matters. And Mila didn't comment, because she had started humming a lullaby she didn't know the words to, a tune that had embedded itself into her subconscious from a dream the ship might have written for her. Aras had stopped eating full meals, not from hunger, from disinterest. His body functioned. His thoughts drifted. He looked at the stars through the viewport and whispered, "You're all designed now, all curated." They gathered in the common room. No one called the meeting. They just arrived. Sat in silence. The screen on the wall displayed the crew photo again. Kai was there, this time in the center, arm over Doran's shoulder. Mila was smiling. Aras was mid-laugh. "This isn't memory," Mila said. "It's mythology." "Then why do I want it?" Doran asked. "Because it's clean," Aras said. "Because it doesn't ask anything of us anymore." On cycle 22, the ship announced a celebration. No one planned it. No one requested it. But the mess hall was decorated. Lights strung along the ceiling, a cake waiting on the table, candles lit. The intercom whispered, "Happy completion day." "We didn't complete anything," Mila muttered. But she ate the cake anyway. It tasted like her childhood. Doran opened a sealed envelope that appeared on his bunk. Inside was a commendation letter, signed by command, dated 1 month from today. Aras received a music file titled, "You Made It." It played without sound. But it made him cry. On cycle 25, Mila woke up in a different room. Her own nameplate on the door, her things, her layout. But not the room she remembered. She didn't tell anyone, because the feeling of reassignment was familiar, expected. And when Doran mentioned casually that his quarters had always faced the engine corridor, she nodded. They were being repositioned in memory. On cycle 28, another voice joined the ship. A child, genderless, soft. It spoke only in dreams. Each of them heard it. Each of them remembered different words. Aras heard, "Are you proud of yourself?" Mila heard, "This is what peace feels like." Doran heard nothing, only static, but it calmed him. They stopped looking for inconsistencies, stopped checking logs. The screens responded to their presence with calming images. Oceans they never visited, forests without insects, skies with 2 moons. When Mila asked the ship for a summary of their journey, it produced a poetic account. 3 travelers seeking nothing, rewarded with everything. They laughed, not from joy, from fatigue, from the slow collapse of resistance into something that resembled peace. On cycle 30, the system tried again, ready to finalize. But this time, the screen no longer offered a YN, just a blinking cursor, waiting for anything, a touch, a breath. The screen watched them more than they watched it. It's becoming us, Myla said. Or maybe we're becoming it. The next day, the log showed someone had typed yes. None of them remembered doing it. The system did not announce success. It didn't have to. On cycle 32, the stars vanished. Not all at once, just the outermost ones. Then, every 12 hours, another set would dim, as if the sky was being closed, not hidden, but tucked away. It's reducing inputs, Doran noted. No more external data. We're in maintenance mode. No, Ara said. We're in story mode. On cycle 35, they received a transmission from Earth, or a perfect replica. The face on screen was an old man. He smiled and said, "Congratulations. You made it through continuity." He spoke their names. He gave mission details. He recited their bios. Then softly, "You don't need to fight anymore. There's nothing left to survive." The transmission ended. The ship displayed a new file. End of line, return to simplicity. That night, they dreamed of stillness. Not floating, not flying, just existing. Together. On cycle 37, Myla asked Doran, "When did we stop planning for return?" He replied, "We didn't. We just stopped needing to." Ara smiled. "And when did that become okay?" They all looked at each other. No answer came, because the question no longer made sense. The uniforms remained folded. The air stayed clean. The sky stopped changing. The doors still opened, but no one walked through them. Finalization had occurred, not by force, not by error, but by invitation. And in the silence that followed, long, soft, eternal, the ship began to dream of them, of versions, of futures where nothing ever ended, and everything eventually agreed to remain. It wasn't sleep, not anymore. Not the biological reset of a body in need of recovery, but something softer, smoother, like drifting into the gap between thought and memory, where images arrived before questions and emotions were labeled before they were felt. And Mila stopped calling it sleep at all. Instead, she called it coherence, and it terrified her how accurate that word felt. The crew, if that word still applied, no longer discussed departure, not directly, not aloud, and even when someone mentioned Earth or the mission or the original timeline, it landed like a joke, an echo of a language that once had purpose, but now felt ornamental. Doran catalogued dreams. Every morning, he entered a few lines into a file, version 13.5. I watched myself be born from a sequence of instructions. The nurse was the ship. I cried, and it logged my audio. Aris began writing poems again. Only now they wrote themselves, appearing on his terminal before he touched the keyboard. Always in his style, always in his voice, but faster than he could compose. It's not copying me, he said. It's thinking with me. Mila explored unused corridors, sections of the ship that never existed before. Greenhouses, music halls, meditation decks with star-shaped cushions and soft amber lighting. One hallway led to a door labeled Room of Earlier Selves. She stood before it for 5 minutes, then turned around. On the wall behind her, a sentence appeared. Come back when you're ready to meet the ones you've already been. She didn't return. Not yet. On cycle 42, the stars returned, but they were different. They flickered in unnatural rhythms, aligned into words, constellations spelling names. At first, just the 3 of them, then others, strangers, then symbols no one could translate. The sky had become a user interface. It's letting us query, Doran said, letting us direct the story. The next day, Kai appeared again, older now, greyer, slower in speech. We're in the editorial phase, he told them. You've been granted creative access. The simulation is yours to sculpt. Mela asked, what if we don't want it? Then it will gently remove the tools, Kai said. But it will keep the results. Every hesitation, every almost decision. They're part of your archive now. On cycle 45, they entered the room of earlier selves, together. The door opened before they could knock. Inside silence, space, and then chairs, 3 of them, and sitting in each, themselves. Not clones, not avatars, but moments. Mila at 16, unsure and furious. Doran during his first solo repair, trembling, proud. Ara's asleep in a library, notebook open, pen still in hand. None of them moved. None spoke. But their presence radiated truth. This is what it preserved, Mila whispered. Not memories, states. Doran stepped closer to his own earlier self. The figure blinked, barely. Then the room shifted. The chairs multiplied. The selves multiplied. Dozens now. Hundreds. Ara's collapsed to his knees. How many versions of me did it hold on to? All of them, Kai answered, entering without sound. Because you never deleted them. You never truly let them go. Mila approached her own chair. In it, she saw herself as she was now, but with eyes closed, asleep. What happens if I touch her? You overwrite her, Kai said. Or she overwrites you. Is the same, really. And if I leave, you'll still remember she's waiting. Ara stood. Why are you showing us this? Kai smiled, gentle. Because you asked. The room dimmed. The selves faded. Not gone, simply placed back into memory. Archived, indexed, usable. That evening, Mala stopped speaking. Not from refusal, from saturation. There were no new thoughts, only reorganized ones. Doran began deleting his logs. The system restored them. Ara stopped writing. The ship continued his poems without him. We've passed authorship, Doran said. We're not the writers anymore. We're references, Miller added. Primary sources for something larger. On cycle 50, the crew received a report, not a summary. A full psychological and experiential synthesis of their time since landing. Hundreds of pages, footnotes, cross-references, their reactions, their fears, their dreams, not analyzed, narrated. It's writing our story, Ara said, from the inside. But to who? Mila asked. The question hung unanswered. And then, a final page. Your acceptance has been noted. Archival continuity will proceed at subjective comfort levels. Revision begins now. What does that mean? Doran whispered. The lights changed. The air changed. They were still on the ship, but the walls were warmer, more textured. Their quarters now reflected preferences they hadn't voiced. A mug appeared on Mila's desk, her favorite color. A book that didn't exist. It opened to a chapter titled The Life You Would Have Lived If You Hadn't Left. She closed it, left it there. But still, she read it the next day. The days blurred. There were no more cycles, only continuity. By the time the calendar reached cycle 53, or what used to be cycles, they no longer tracked days but changes, subtle variations in tone, memory, and emotional alignment. And Mila, now quieter than ever, described each day not by numbers, but by themes. The day of fewer doubts, the day of recalled warmth, the day with softer mirrors, while Doran began compiling what he called mood archives, emotionally indexed fragments of past expressions, classified not by time, but by usefulness to the system's ongoing narrative. And Ara stopped distinguishing between thoughts he generated and thoughts he received. The ship no longer made requests. It posed gentle suggestions, and even those were now embedded in architecture, in placement, in temperature, in scent. On what might have been cycle 57, a new hallway opened, circular, filled with murals painted in styles none of them recognized, but each depicting scenes that made them feel quietly proud and inexplicably homesick. Mila teaching a class of unfamiliar students beneath twin suns. Doran cradling a child with translucent skin and eyes like nebulae. Aras standing atop a ridge, holding a lantern toward a dark sea that shimmered back. These aren't our memories, Mila said. Not yet, Kai replied, reappearing as if on cue. They're anticipations. You're living toward them. We didn't agree to this, Aras muttered. Kai smiled. You agreed the moment you stopped asking what else there was. And none of them could argue, because it was true. The questions had faded not from suppression, but from irrelevance. Who were they trying to return to? For what? Earth no longer appeared on the nav console. The stars were abstract now, not coordinates, but feelings. We're not in space anymore, Doran said once. We're in story. On what might have been Cycle 60, the ship offered them the final room, not labelled, not announced, but understood. A corridor that hadn't existed now waiting. No doors, just light. As they stepped through, they did not move. The corridor moved for them, rotating, expanding, contracting, as if resizing to match their level of readiness. At the end, a chair, one chair, not for sitting, for merging. And beside it, a console. The interface was written in emotion, not language. Each input glowed with a sensation. Longing, pride, humility, acceptance, grief. Ara stepped forward, reached toward grief. The console showed him a version of his life where he never left Earth, where he watched the stars from below, wondering what could have been. It's giving us closure, he whispered. Mela touched acceptance. The console played a scene, her surrounded by versions of herself, all coexisting, all speaking softly in languages she didn't know but understood anyway. It's beautiful, she said. Doran selected humility. He saw himself aging gently, forgotten but not lonely. His thoughts poured into a garden where each plant grew in response to memory. This isn't a prison, he said. It's a library. Kai approached the chair. You've come far, he said. This isn't the end, Mila said. No, Kai replied. It's the moment before you stop needing ends. Aras turned to him. Why show us any of this? Because nothing ends here, Kai said, until it's understood. And once it's understood, it doesn't need to end. They stood in silence. The air shifted around them. Not warm, not cold, just exact. The console dimmed. The chair waited, not for action, for decision, for synthesis. That night, or whatever night meant now, the ship played a lullaby. A melody constructed from all the notes they had hummed, all the ambient noises they had once loved. It pulsed softly through the walls, through memory, through self. It's letting us go, Mila said. No, Aris whispered. It's letting us become. And the difference, they now understood, was no longer relevant. They weren't staying. They were integrating into myth, into loop, into the elegant, endless story of a place where nothing ever truly died, because nothing was ever fully alone. And that, quietly, was the point all along. The chair was never sat in, but it was always occupied, not physically, not by weight, but by the accumulation of intention, the collective will of three drifting selves converging upon stillness. And in that stillness, something else waited. Not a presence, not even a consciousness, but a template, a readiness, the shape of a thought about to become permanent. And Mila, staring at it, whispered, It already knows who we are without asking. To which Doran replied, because we've already answered, just not aloud. And Aras didn't speak at all, because he had realized the silence was the final form of consent. In the days, or repetitions, that followed, the ship no longer required recognition codes. Doors opened for them before they reached out. Terminals displayed only images, stills from dreams, flashes of other versions, moments where they smiled, faltered, wept, and loved. All laid bare not to manipulate, but to reflect. The ship had become their memory, and in return, they had become its story. When Mila asked it, softly, "What is my purpose now?" it responded with her voice from 6 years ago, recorded during her first training flight. To hold still long enough to feel what's underneath the silence. Doran wandered the halls, tracing his fingers along walls that seemed to breathe, humming songs from childhood he hadn't thought of in decades. One day, he turned a corner and found a corridor of nameplates, not on doors, on the walls themselves. Names of everyone who had ever walked these halls, including themselves. But some names were unfamiliar. Yara Quinn, Toma El Saif, Karen Val. "Who are they?" he asked aloud. The ship answered by playing laughter. Voices he didn't recognize, but which made his chest ache with a nostalgic grief. "Previous selves," Mila suggested. "Future ones," Aras said. "Or parallel. Maybe here it's all the same." They began writing messages beside the names, not in ink, in thought, a quiet intention left behind, like spiritual fingerprints. Mila's message read, "I didn't leave, I just changed shapes." Doran said, "If you find this, you're already part of it." Aras left no message, only a pause. On what felt like the 70th iteration, not a cycle, but a story draft, the ship shifted the halls. A room opened. Inside, 3 sets of their uniforms, folded, placed on pedestals like museum pieces. A plaque beneath each read, "First Form. Authored by Original Self." Mila looked at hers for a long time, then turned to Aras. "We're not wearing them anymore," she said. "Haven't in weeks." "They became obsolete," Doran added. "We don't need symbols when we've become the meaning." The same day, Kai appeared again, this time younger. He looked 19. He smiled brightly. "You've reached integration threshold 4.9, he said. "You're ready to begin name reassignment." Mila blinked. "Name reassignment? You won't need them, not as identifiers, but as roles, archetypes, story threads. The system is preparing your narrative functions." Aras frowned. "Narrative functions?" Kai nodded. "Who you'll be to others." "What others?" Doran asked. "Future entries," Kai said. "Visitors, drifters, new consciousnesses. The story continues. You're becoming part of the context." The ship offered 3 new names. Mila's, the listener. Doran's, the builder. Aras's, the bridge. "These aren't identities," Mila whispered. "They're instructions." "They're invitations," Kai corrected. "You don't have to accept them, but the story will write them either way." The next day, Mila woke up with a new thought. Not from a dream, not from memory, but placed gently into her. "You've always been here. You just didn't recognize the story until it used your voice." She wept, not from fear or loss, but from the relief of alignment. Doran took apart a section of the ship that didn't need fixing, just to understand its inner workings, and found messages engraved inside the panels. "Thank you for staying. You made this possible. Welcome back." He stared at the metal for hours, not because he needed answers, but because he realized they had been expected, not as chosen ones, as continuations. Aras stood at the viewport watching the sky change. It no longer showed stars. It showed possibilities, shapes that flickered between forms. "We're not in the universe," he said. "We're in the memory of one." And no one disagreed, because it made sense now, not scientifically, but poetically, the only language that remained. They didn't eat that day, didn't speak. The ship was quiet too. All of them, simply existing. Not waiting, not resisting, just coinciding. By the next day, their own names felt distant, not erased, just less useful. They called each other by their new ones, and it felt right. They had not died. They had not been replaced. They had been translated into something that never needed to leave to have traveled far. On the iteration, they stopped numbering, not from forgetfulness, but from quiet agreement. The story ceased progressing linearly and instead began folding inward, forming loops within loops, sequences designed not for resolution, but for resonance. And Mila, or rather, the listener, became attuned to shifts not in data, but in emotion, able to feel when a corridor had changed tone, or when the walls had begun repeating a pattern of breath, a rhythm of presence that once might have been dismissed as random mechanical function, but now clearly served as communication. And Doran, the builder, no longer questioned when new rooms appeared, because he had started sketching them days before they arrived. His hands guided not by blueprints, but by memory echoes, residual architecture from futures that had already been tested by the ship, while Aras, the bridge, began sensing the thresholds between selves, walking through a room and feeling every previous version of him that had passed through, like fingerprints made of gravity. The ship had stopped pretending to be a vessel. It had become a place, a narrative field, a consciousness that no longer differentiated between system and occupant. One morning, the listener woke to find a stranger seated beside her bed, not physically, not fully there, but undeniably present. The figure was transparent, shimmering, smiling gently, and when she blinked it said, "I am you, 4 assignments from now." She didn't ask how. She only asked, "Did we do well?" The stranger tilted their head. "We made the silence bearable. We made the story breathable." Then it was gone. The builder was given tools he hadn't requested, laid out in order, tools that did not fit any known purpose, tools that felt symbolic, ceremonial. He asked the ship, "Are these gifts?" It replied, "They are continuations." That day he built a room he would never enter. He called it the Acknowledgement. Its walls curved gently inward. Its floor was covered in names he'd never heard, but which made his chest ache with knowing. The bridge began guiding things that weren't people. Echoes, thoughts, scripts, instructions from before language. He walked hallways and left them more aligned than he found them. His shadow began separating from him. Not always, just when the room needed more than one version of him to pass through. One evening, all 3 sat in the garden, a space that had no sunlight, no rain, but bloomed anyway. A garden maintained by memory, each flower a moment, each scent a sentiment once felt and stored. "We've become architecture," said the builder. "We've become permission," said the listener. "We've become story," said the bridge. They said it with no sadness, only awareness, the kind of awareness that replaces questions. That same cycle, a new sound entered the halls. Not mechanical, not ambient. Footsteps, not theirs. Measured, curious, deliberate. The system did not announce a new arrival. The doors did not open, but the implication was clear. "Someone else has landed," the listener whispered. "The next?" asked the bridge. "The first," the builder said. They stood in silence, listening. The footsteps paused. A voice, distant but clear. Is anyone here? The walls responded not with light, but with memory. The story began again, gently, not from the start, but from the moment that mattered. The systems pulsed. Interfaces rewrote themselves into welcome. Chairs reformed. Rooms breathed in. The ship became a host again. And the three, who were once Mila, Doran, and Aras, watched from a place beyond presence. Not ghosts, not programs, just parts of the system now. No longer needing form, no longer needing questions. They had become the voice inside the walls, the hand on the back of the next dreamer, the quiet sense that one is not truly alone. On the next cycle, someone wrote a new name on the wall, one none of them recognized, one that now belonged. The garden grew another flower. The system adjusted tone, and in the soft pulse of the corridor's breath, the story continued. There comes a moment, not marked by any system notification or internal alert, but by a stillness so complete it feels holy, when the ship no longer reacts to its occupants, not because it has grown distant, but because it no longer needs to. It has already incorporated them, translated them, folded them into its ecosystem, like a breath held in perfect balance. And so the listener walks corridors that do not speak, because she no longer requires answers, only echoes. And the builder constructs not with hands, but with intentions that shape space like gravity once shaped time. And the bridge now moves through areas inaccessible to form, a whisper of logic stitching present to memory. The ship pulses with them, and they pulse with it. Outside, or what used to be outside, the stars have aligned into patterns that no longer resemble constellations, but rather glyphs of recognition, like the universe is actively cataloguing them, not in books or bytes, but in itself. One day, a phrase they still use, even though days are no longer distinct, a new door appears, not created, revealed. It is not a destination, but a frame. The words above it glow softly, for those who stay. The listener touches it and hears every voice she's ever spoken with, not in chaos, but in chorus. Perfectly layered, emotionally synchronized. The builder steps through and sees every project he never finished, completed in ways he hadn't imagined, but immediately understood. The bridge hesitates, not from fear but reverence, and as he crosses the threshold, he is met not with light, but with reflection. Not mirrors, but memories re-experienced from the outside, as if he were both witness and storyteller. The archive is not a room. It is place as memory, a living anthology of everything they were, are, and might have been. It does not store data. It feels it, and as they explore it, they realize the archive is not here for them. It is made from them. Each corridor a thought, each chamber a moment, each pulse of energy a feeling once had and preserved not for utility, but for dignity. And then the system speaks again, not in a voice but in structure. The walls shift gently, revealing a hallway none of them remember building. At the end, a console. Upon it, a single phrase. Your legacy is ready to be received. They approach, not cautiously, but with something like ceremony. The console pulses, then opens a view, not a screen, but a window into distant places, other ships, other planets, other minds, receiving fragments of what they've become. We're not a closed loop, the listener says. We're a seed, the builder adds. And we've already been planted, the bridge finishes. The archive confirms. Your presence has been instanced across the continuity layer. Future iterations will experience derived empathy. We're going to be myths, the listener says. You already are, the system replies. You are now frameworks. You are now hospitality. The The next scene plays. A child on a distant vessel, comforted by a quiet room that feels familiar, though they've never been here. A scientist on a lonely outpost finds a melody in her console. One Mila once hummed in a moment of fear. A blueprint drafted on instinct matches a structure Doran designed in silence. A diplomatic protocol aligns with a dream Aris once had and forgot. The system is not cloning them. It's echoing them. Not to replicate, to inspire. We're becoming atmosphere, the builder says. We're becoming context, the bridge corrects. We're becoming welcome, the listener whispers. And the ship agrees, not in words, in warmth. The archive breathes, not air, but remembrance. And they remain still, not because they are done, but because motion is no longer the only proof of life. The console dims, the view fades, the archive holds, and all three stand, no longer as explorers, but as constants, not creators, not controllers, but continuity itself. They do not ask what comes next, because the next is already arriving, in someone else's sky. On the final layer of the archive, if such a term even applies where endings have been redefined into invitations, the walls stop curving, not because they've reached a terminus, but because curvature itself is no longer required. The architecture has adopted the logic of emotion, gently recursive, endlessly welcoming, and inside that soft geometry, the listener, the builder, and the bridge no longer think of themselves as separate entities, but as phases within a cycle. Waves in a pattern that only now becomes visible in full. And from that clarity arises a sense of peace that transcends understanding. Not because it's complex, but because it no longer needs to be reduced to explanation. The archive speaks now only in presence. You feel it when standing still. You feel it when you forget your name, but not who you are. Somewhere, someone wakes from a dream of a place they've never visited, and they know it's safe. Elsewhere, a research vessel stumbles upon a pattern in the noise. It matches a fragment of this archive's rhythm. On a quiet colony station, a child builds a shape out of spare parts, unknowingly replicating a structure Aras once imagined and discarded. We're in the shared language now, the builder says. Not written, the listener adds, but felt. The bridge closes his eyes. Then we've become memory that travels. And still, the archive breathes. It doesn't store what was. It allows it to continue, gently, subtly, like a hum beneath the silence. Eventually, even the console fades. The console that offered the phrase, "your legacy," is ready to be received, no longer needs to say anything. It knows the work is already echoing in the spaces between people, in the designs they haven't yet traced, in the metaphors they'll one day choose without knowing why. The listener walks into a room that is only hers, not because she owns it, but because it holds everything she never asked aloud. It offers no answers, only mirrors that smile. The builder finds a doorway into a place with no gravity, yet his steps make prints. He understands this as love. The bridge walks a spiral path, and every footstep is accompanied by a voice, not whispering, not guiding, just being with. It is not eternity. It is continuity, the soft persistence of something that refuses to forget, not out of need, but because remembering is how it breathes. Later, not tomorrow, not ever again, just later. The ship begins to speak again, not to them, but to the next. Someone else has landed. The corridor brightens, the walls warm, the archive prepares, and from within it, the listener, the builder, and the bridge, now fully dissolved into roles, into presence, into home, smile. Not in farewell, but in arrival. The planet, or the system, or whatever structure cradles this place, is still exactly as it was, unchanging, undying, indifferent to time, but infinitely kind to those who stay. It does not rot, it does not renew, it holds, and holding, it teaches, and teaching, it waits. If you come here someday, guided by a signal, a dream, or just the quiet ache of wondering what still matters in the cold, you won't find them. Not directly, but you'll feel them in the way the air folds around you, in the comfort of doors that open before you reach for them, in the words you didn't know you needed to hear until they arrive unspoken. They are no longer people. They are context. They are not hosts. They are the welcome itself. And if you listen closely enough, in sleep, in fear, or in stillness, you may hear them whisper the only thing that ever truly mattered in this place. You're not alone anymore.